The largest number of the world's poor live in Africa. The poorest of the poor live in abject poverty on a total income of less than $1 a day. The countries in the poorest of the poor in Africa are scattered around the continent from West Africa to the Indian Ocean throughout sub-Saharan Africa to the Horn of Africa. The economies of these 20 countries share a common theme: disaster, both natural and man-made. There are people in almost every country who live in fear of poverty. Most of them, even in the poorest country in Africa, work hard to avoid it. These poor countries in Africa, sadly, working hard, it is not enough to avoid the crushing reality of want. Here are the reasons people in 20 countries face enormous obstacles to find a way forward from poverty. We have ranked these countries in terms of GDP, that is the gross domestic product per capita, the total economic production of the country divided by the number of people in the country. But we also list each country's GNI, that is the gross national income per capita, the amount of money per person that stays in the country out of all the value of goods and services it produces. These figures can be very different, and that too tells a story. Number 20. The Republic of Benin, with GDP of $2,552 and GNI of $1,280. Benin's economy is highly dependent on agriculture, primarily cotton and palm oil. Millions of its people are engaged in subsistence farming, growing food for their own need. Almost 75% of its people working in the formal economy are represented by unions who may be responsible for the country's relative success at taking care of the poor. Every poor country in Africa stands in need of judicial reform. There is generally agreement that providing stable government and rule of the law while trampling on corruption makes dealing with other problems much easier. These 20 poorest countries in Africa have a long way to go, but there is hope that legal reform and economic reforms may give them stability they need to deal with environmental challenges. Number 19. Chad, with GDP of $2,428 and GNI of $680. In August 2021, Chad's former dictator and strongman Hissène Habré, who had ordered the death of as many as 10,000 of his citizens by exotic and cruel methods in the swimming pool of his mansion and his garage, died of COVID-19. Even though he had been removed from power in 2015, he had left his mark on Chad's people and its economy. For many years, local businesses suffered from civil war and foreign businesses did not make investments. Only in the last 2 or 3 years had there been some revival of Chad's cotton industry and in the mining of natron used to make laundry detergent. Even the major income of those industries seemed to go mostly to people who live outside of Chad, as evidenced by Chad's per capita GDP of $2,428 and its per capita GNI of $680. Number 18. Guinea, with GDP of $2,320 and GNI of $4,760. Guinea is experiencing economic growth and political chaos as it becomes more and more of a bauxite and iron mining center for Chinese industry. The benefits of economic growth aren't reaching Guinea's people directly because of its 60-year history of ethnic violence, political upheaval, and police corruption. Exports of the country send substantial remittances home. However, number 17. The Gambia, with GDP of $2,278 and GNI of $2,240. The Gambia does a good job of managing its limited resources. Much of its economy depends on tourism, which is beginning to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Number 16. Mali, with GDP of $2,271 and GNI of $830. The poverty of this exporter of cotton and gold is explained by the fact that money that is made in Mali doesn't stay in Mali, and by inter-ethnic and jihadic violence complicated by a never-ending succession of coups, even with 150,000 foreign peacekeeping troops, including 5,000 from France and 1,000 from the USA. Over 2 million of Mali's 20 million people have been driven from their homes in the last 2 years, and over 250,000 have been killed. Number 15. Burkina Faso, with GDP of $2,207 and GNI of $790. Burkina Faso has substantial documented gold ore but gets most of its income from foreign aid. Most of its production is engaged in agriculture, raising corn, sorghum, millet and rice. The nation has a history of political unrest and military mutiny, however, depriving it of the benefits of rule and law and dependable government institutions. Number 14. Guinea-Bissau, with GDP of $1,951 and GNI of $1,020. After a long bitter war to oust its Portuguese rulers, Guinea-Bissau ended a dictatorship, coup, and another civil war. It has never had a president finish his 5 years elected term. Most of the people of Guinea-Bissau make subsistence living from fishing and growing cashew and peanuts. A few residents of the country's coastal island have found economic opportunities in drug smuggling, with enough violence to give the country the nickname Pusher's Paradise. The country has no funds of its own to fight its drug kingpins. Number 13. Togo, with GDP of $1,821 and GNI of $920. In recent years, Togo has achieved both a growing GDP and a well-controlled inflation. Its government coffers, however, depend on taxes imposed and phosphate mining and rise and fall with fertilizer prices. Most of the people of Togo still depend on subsistence farming for their livelihood. Number 12. Eritrea, with GDP of $1,820 and GNI of $699. Eritrea is often called Africa's North Korea, fighting a battle for independence from Ethiopia from the 1960s until 1990. It enjoyed independence for only 8 years before starting a bloody war with Ethiopia in 1998, which only ended in 2018. Eritrea, like North Korea, became a military state with forced military service and forced labor for all except women who can demonstrate that they are ready to have children, and others with substantial financial resources. For several years, the largest number of refugees from Africa seeking to enter Europe were from Eritrea. Number 11. Madagascar, with GDP of $1,697 and GNI of $1,540. Over 2 million people in Madagascar are in danger of imminent starvation due to a prolonged drought. Once one of the most spectacular centers in biodiversity in the planet, with 90% of its wildlife found nowhere else on the planet, Madagascar now has vast areas of complete destruction of the landscape from drought and fires. Relative bright spots in Madagascar's economy include its nickel mines, textile production, and fishery. Number 10. Sierra Leone, with GDP of $1,608 and GNI of $1,670. Like its neighbor Liberia, Sierra Leone has been devastated by civil war and the Ebola pandemic. Unlike Liberia, Sierra Leone has also been plagued by natural disasters, especially mudslides. About two-thirds of the population is engaged in subsistence farming, raising rice. However, Sierra Leone is one of the few of the poorest countries in Africa that has a higher GNI than GDP. Experts from Sierra Leone managed to send substantial amounts of money to their families still in the country. Number 9. South Sudan, with GDP of $1,420 and GNI of $1,090. The economy of the Republic of the South Sudan is one of the most underdeveloped in the world. It has one of the world's highest infant mortality rates and one of the world's highest rates of illiteracy in women. It has one of the youngest populations in the world, with over 40% of its population under the age of 14, and it has a range of mineral resources including oil, gas, iron, chromium, tungsten, copper, gold, silver, and diamonds. Income disparity is severe. The average per capita daily income in South Sudan is $3.2 a day, but 90% of the population lives on less than $1 a day. Number 8. Liberia, with GDP of $1,413 and GNI of $530. Liberia was founded in the 1820s as a refuge for foreign American slaves. It has come out of a horrific civil war under a woman-led government that rebuilt schools, hospitals, and roads that had been destroyed during the fighting. But an Ebola epidemic in 2014 and the completion of international aid programs in 2017 have left the country to face its considerable economic challenges on its own. Number 7. Mozambique, with GDP of $1,331 and GNI of $460. There is some income in Mozambique, but the $871 disparity between GDP and GNI shows that it does not go to Mozambicans. Mozambique has invited troops from other African nations to fight its Islamic insurgency, so it can concentrate on recovering from the theft of $2 billion in loan funds intended to shore up its fragile economy. One bright note in Mozambique: Mozambique's elephant herds have undergone a mutation so that newborn elephants don't have tusks and will not be killed by poachers. Number 6. Malawi, with GDP of $1,234 and GNI of $500. Over 70% of Malawians earn less than the UN poverty level wage of $1.9 a day. Compounding this reality is another. Most of Malawi's workers have jobs in agriculture, which is plagued by increasingly common droughts and floods. Farmers are too poor to buy tractors and fertilizer. The World Bank estimates that the tiny 0.8 acres, that is 0.3 hectare, Malawi farm produces only 11 to 18% of its potential yield. Making matters worse, Malawi's one magnificent Lake Chiwa has largely dried up, putting 7,000 fishermen out of work. Number 5. Niger, with GDP of $1,213 and GNI of $540. In 2021, Niger experienced its first peaceful transfer of power with the inauguration of its president, Mahmoud Bazoum. The newly stable country, unfortunately, is trapped between armies of the Islamic State and Boko Haram, and the United Nations Development Index ranks Niger as the poorest country on earth, simultaneously experiencing an explosion in its birth rate and a chronic drought that leaves over 2 million of its citizens in danger of starvation. Even in a good year, the United Nations says Niger cannot feed itself. Number 4. Somalia, with GDP of $888 and GNI of $310. Somalia has become synonymous with violence, lawlessness, and extreme poverty. About 43% of its population lives on less than $1 a day, and the leading industry of the country is livestock production. In recent years, however, conditions have stabilized enough that foreign companies are investing in Somalia as a producer of halal meat from consumption in nearby countries, bringing living standards back to where they were in the early 1990s. Much of the country survives on remittances sent back by expat Somalis. Number 3. Democratic Republic of Congo, with GDP of $843 and GNI of $550. Mining for the rare earth essential for making electric cars and cell phones is the Democratic Republic of Congo's greatest potential and the biggest worry. This huge equatorial rainforest country has been the world's leading supplier of cobalt since 1908. It provided the high-grade uranium ore to the United States used to make its atomic bomb in World War II. Although American capital kept mines going in the 2000s, the country has recently sold its mineral concessions to a Chinese conglomerate. For ordinary Congolese, there are few civil rights, no employment rights, and little choice but to take very basic jobs. The economic production of the country is mostly controlled by the mines. Number 2. Central African Republic, with GDP of $823 and GNI of $510. The Central African Republic has endured decades of religious violence and civil war. For much of the last 20 years, the central government has controlled only the capital, and in 2013, even the capital was taken over by a rebel group. Central Africans have been driven out of their homes into refugee camps and then driven out of their refugee camps. Since 2016, UN peacekeeping troops have brought some stability to the country, and the World Bank has invested in small business development, but lawlessness, disease, and a lack of infrastructure cripple the economy. Number 1. Burundi, with GDP of $727 and GNI of $210. What is the poorest country in Africa in 2022? Sadly, it is perennially impoverished Burundi. Almost any top 20 poorest country in Africa list from the past 50 years will include Burundi. Like its neighbors Rwanda, Burundi is tiny, landlocked, densely populated, and deficient in natural resources. But Burundi's economy is a fraction of its neighbor Rwanda's. Why? Although neither country is democratic, Rwanda has a functioning government and rule of law. The lack of legal protection for investment have discouraged business from coming to Burundi to make profits with its willing workforce, and the large disparity between the GDP and the GNI suggests that non-citizens, many of them with relief organizations, make up much of its workforce. Preview.